This is the Music History In-Depth podcast for May 29th through June 4th. On this oversized edition, we discuss how a classic ballet had a not-so-good reception, how one concert can change the world, how picking on the establishment can lead to great sales, and a bunch of other things. Let's start off with some movie music, shall we? On November 30th, 1940, Walt Disney released an animated movie that celebrated both animation and great classical music. The movie was called Fantasia. In the movie were great classical musical pieces from the likes of Beethoven, Bach, Schubert, and Tchaikovsky. The fourth piece of music in the movie backed up the animation of the formation of the Earth, right up until the point of where the dinosaurs went extinct. 27 years earlier, however, the audience who first heard this music thought that it was the composer who was the one who should have been made extinct. On May 29, 1913, the audience who first heard the ballet at the Théâtre des Champs-Élysées in Paris, France, were expecting to hear something pleasing and audience-friendly, much like this composer's ballet only 3 years earlier. Instead, what they got was a ballet that depicted a virgin sacrifice in pagan Russia, along with a jarring bassoon noise. And that was just the beginning. The audience, to be nice about it, hated it. They booed, threw things, and started making dog noises. The noise became so great that you couldn't hear the orchestra, and the choreographer of the ballet had to shout instructions to his dancers. To say that it didn't go well is an understatement. However, times change, and after a while, the ballet and the music accompanying it became classics. The audience on May 29, 1913 were hoping to hear another version of the composer's ballet from 3 years earlier, known as The Firebirds. Instead, they were treated to a piece that was way ahead of its time for 20th century classical music, Igor Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring. So far ahead of its time that 27 years later, the ballet, with a virgin sacrifice in the beginning of it, became part of the Disney kids movie Fantasia. Next, we discuss a composer and his most famous opera. Georges Bizet was born on October 25th, 1838 in Paris, France. He started out pretty well, winning awards at the Conservatoire de Paris, and even though he was lauded for his piano skills, he never actually showcased those skills a lot in public. Instead, he wrote operas and other works, most of which missed the mark with the public at the time. Then he finally hit pay dirt with an opera. Well, sorta. But it wasn't really immediate. Bizet's opera was first performed in 1875 after the controversy surrounding it almost derailed the performance. The opera is about a gypsy girl who seduces an army corporal named Don Jose, who was engaged at the time. After being seduced by the girl, Don Jose helps the girl escape trouble with the cops, only to be put in jail himself. He then deserts the army in order to be with her, and, of course, as with every great love story, the girl kicks Don Jose to the side for a bullfighter. You know how that goes. Don Jose, of course, can't handle it. I mean, it is an opera, let's get real, no happy endings. So he kills her by stabbing her. Why great love stories always end up with someone dead, I couldn't tell you. But I'm looking at you, William Shakespeare and Romeo and Juliet. You spoiled it for everybody. Spoiler alert, by the way, Romeo and Juliet both die. Anywho, here is where the controversy kicks in with this particular opera. The Opéra Comique in Paris, France, where the opera was being staged, was known for being family-friendly with their productions. Doing one where someone gets killed was not going to fly at all. Members of the production's leadership got into a heated battle over it. It got to the point where one of them quit because Bizet wouldn't change the script one single bit. The scandal was so hot that big actresses of the era wouldn't even try out for the part of the main character. It was that toxic a controversy. Finally, on March 3rd, 1875, the opera Carmen premiered. At first, it was met with halfway decent reviews. However, as time went on, people began to warm up to the opera and it became a classic. Unfortunately, Bizet didn't live long enough to see Carmen become huge, having had a heart attack on June 3rd, 1875, and dying only 30 performances into the opera's run. As with a lot of artists, his music was appreciated long after his death. In Bizet's case, it was in the 20th century, and that was after a lot of his manuscripts were lost or altered. Even the critics who wanted to crush Carmen went and called it a masterpiece after Bizet passed away. Such is human nature, I suppose. Like they say, death is a great career move. You're just not around long enough to enjoy the benefits of it. The man who wrote the opera Carmen, composer George Bizet, passed away on June 3rd, 1875. Now, we celebrate the birthday of a legendary bandleader. This man was the 9th out of 12 kids. His father came from Poland and his mother came from Lithuania. They met in Baltimore, Maryland, and moved to Chicago, where our bandleader was born. Their neighborhood was in the ghetto in the Maxwell Street neighborhood, and although the family didn't have any money, the father somehow managed to pay for his kid's music lessons as the kid became interested in music. While he was in Chicago, he learned from artists such as Johnny Dodds and Jimmy Noon. By the time he was 14 years old, he was already playing professionally. His father, unfortunately, wouldn't live to see his success. His father passed away tragically in an accident when he was 17 years old. After that, the kid moved to New York City and became a successful session musician. After a number of years, he got his own band together and started working the supper clubs, including a 4-month gig at the Billy Rose Music Hall. He wanted to take the band over to England to perform, but he wanted the band to be racially integrated. So for one reason or another, and you could probably figure out which reason it actually was, those plans fell through. Desperate for money and also a gig, he banked all of his hopes on what he finally managed to get, which was a radio show on NBC Radio called Let's Dance. There, the band started playing a new style of music called swing music. The radio show was popular enough, but became a victim of a strike against the sponsor of the show, the National Biscuit Company, which later became known as what you probably know it as today, Nabisco. Because Nabisco had to stop sponsoring shows while the strike was going on, Let's Dance became a victim of that and was canceled right in the middle of the Great Depression. Here is where history takes a really weird turn. The radio show lineup was such that the kids' band was on late in the evening, sometimes after midnight. On the East Coast, that meant that most people hadn't heard this new style of music or of the band itself. However, on the West Coast, the radio show was live, not taped, which meant that people were listening around 9 o'clock in the evening to the show, while the East Coast and the Central Time zones were listening, if you were up that late, around 11 o'clock, midnight or so, depending. It was on the West Coast that the band and the swing style of music took hold. The band heard that kids on the West Coast had invented dances to do with their music, so the band scraped some money together and went on tour on the West Coast. And little by little, the music and the dancing went from the West Coast to the East Coast and began to catch on, and the rest is history. The music and dancing became a cultural phenomenon known as swing music, and its Pied Piper, clarinetist, and bandleader, Benny Goodman, became the catalyst, and Benny Goodman, the kid, was born on May 30th, 1909. Next, We're going to talk about two albums that were released 7 days apart that helped to define the careers of both artists and also the 1980s. We'll discuss the one that was released on May 29, 1984 first. On the May 21st through 28th edition of the Music History In-Depth podcast, i.e. the one we put out last week, we discussed the life and career of Tina Turner, who passed away on May 24th, 2023. We very briefly touched on her comeback album, but we're going to go more in depth on that album since it came out this week in 1984. Unless you're a diehard Tina Turner fan or you saw her biopic, What's Love Got to Do With It, starring Angela Bassett and Lawrence Fishburne, then you may not know just how close Tina Turner came to being yet another star who used to be somebody, as critics like to say. After the demise of both her marriage and musical partnership with Ike Turner, Tina's career was in really bad shape. Her first attempts at a solo career went absolutely nowhere. From 1974 to 1979, Tina put out 4 solo albums, with 1975's album Acid Queen doing any sort of chart action, mainly due to her appearance in the movie version of The Who's rock opera Tommy as the Acid Queen. Tina needed to put food on the table in order to feed her kids, since she barely got any financial help, especially from Ike, and anybody who has been through a divorce with a bad co-parent, you might say, and really knows how that feels. Things got so bad that she had to defy United Nations sanctions against the racist apartheid regime of South Africa and play gigs at their showcase resort called Sun City. Sun City was the resort and entertainment complex that South Africa used to try to show the world that they weren't really as bad as the world was making them out to be, even though they really were as bad as the world was making them out to be. Think of Sun City as that era's music washing version of sports washing, with insert whatever country you want to accuse of it here. There's plenty to choose from. There was even an all-star protest album called Sun City by a group that was fronted by little Steven Van Zandt called Artists Against Apartheid. The album was called Sun City and featured Bono, Miles Davis, Bruce Springsteen, David Bowie, Pat Benatar, Daryl Hall, among many, many others. I only bring this up to show you just how far Tina had fallen off the public radar and how desperate she was, and how far she had also fallen in the eyes of the record labels. Tina received a lot of backlash for going to South Africa and was considered somewhat damaged goods. She was almost canceled, although she received much more empathy once people realized the reason why she had to go. She was literally out of money, and it was the only gig coming. This backlash, for the record, was not received to the same extent by other artists who played Sun City, like Queen or Rod Stewart, you might say. Enter a guy by the name of John Carter. John was an A&R guy at Capitol Records who wanted to sign Tina to a record contract, partially because of Sun City, but mainly because Tina's career seemed to be going nowhere at that point. A lot of people at Capitol Records didn't want Tina signed. John decided to put his career on the line and sign Tina to a Capitol Records recording contract. The album was recorded at Farmyard, Mayfair, Wessex, Good Earth, and Abbey Road recording studios, all in England, by 4 different producing teams. There were 14 songs that were recorded for the album. 9 made the American release. 10 songs made the international release, with that 10th song being a remake of the Beatles song Help, with the jazz fusion group The Crusaders as her backup band, and was produced by jazz great Joe Sample, along with Indugu Chancellor and Wilton Felder. John Carter produced the song Private Dancer, which was written by Mark Knopfler of Dire Straits fame. The guitar solo in the song was done by Jeff Beck, the legend himself. John also produced the Paul Brady-written song Steel Claw. I Might Have Been Queen was co-written and produced by super producer Rupert Hine, who also produced Better Be Good to Me. Better Be Good to Me was co-written by Holly Knight, Nicky Chin, and Mike Chapman, who all wrote big hits in the 1970s and 1980s. Greg Walsh co-produced 2 cover songs for Tina, David Bowie's 1984 and Al Green's Let's Stay Together. Walsh's co-producer on the songs was Martin Ware, who was the co-founder of 2 well-known 80s bands, The Human League and Heaven 17. Terry Britton was the producer on 3 songs, a cover version of Ann Peoples' I Can't Stand the Rain, Show Some Respect, and What's Love Got to Do With It, which he also co-wrote. In 1997, the other 4 songs made it onto a remastered edition of the album, all of them produced by John Carter. I Wrote a Letter, Rock and Roll Widow, Don't Rush the Good Things, and a cover version of the Animals song When I Was Young. In November of 1983, Tina released Let's Stay Together in the UK, then her version of Help in the UK in February 1984. The first official American release was What's Love Got to Do With It in May of 1984. However, the music video for Let's Stay Together started getting some airplay on MTV before What's Love Got to Do With It, so American audiences became familiar again with Tina before What's Love Got to Do With It came out. The album was released on May 29, 1984 to critical acclaim and commercial success. What's Love Got to Do With It became a smash hit, going to number 1 and becoming one of the biggest selling singles of the 1980s. Better Be Good to Me and Private Dancer were also released in the United States and became huge hits. She released I Can't Stand the Rain in 1985 in the UK and Show Some Respect in 1985 in the US. After starting out in 1984 as the opening act for Lionel Richie on his tour just before Private Dancer came out, Tina shifted gears and went on a 177 concert headlining tour in 1985 with Mr. Mister and Glenn Frey as her opening acts. Tina had a stacked backup band with the tour, including Timmy Capello on keyboards and saxophone, who became almost as big a sex symbol as Tina back then, for himself being a bodybuilder, muscular type, and not wearing a shirt on stage. You can see him in the concert video of the tour that was made. It's still out there. It's on, I believe, Netflix. She put in an appearance with her good friend Mick Jagger at Live Aid and recorded a hit duet with Bryan Adams called It's Only Love for Brian's album. She also won 4 out of 6 Grammy Awards that she was nominated for Private Dancer and sold 12 million copies worldwide. Leonard Bernstein even cut his honorary Grammy Award speech short that night because, as he said, he really just wanted to watch Tina Turner perform and she was next up on the program. Who didn't want to watch Tina Turner perform? That lady, don't even get me started on how amazing she was in her performance. Anyway, Tina's comeback was complete. Oh, also safe to say that John Carter managed to keep his job at Capitol Records as well. The release of the legendary, the iconic Queen of Rock and Roll, Tina Turner's comeback album, Private Dancer, on May 29th, 1984. In the music industry, there are 2 people who are nicknamed the Boss. Singer Diana Ross is sometimes called that because of her hit single, The Boss. Really, though, only one person gets to wear the crown of being called the Boss these days. Of course, he sometimes gets called something else. Bruce! Bruce Springsteen is an American icon and one of the guys who helped to popularize Heartland rock along with John Mellencamp and Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. In a musical career, a successful artist can usually point to one album as the album that took them from being a critical darling to becoming a star. Some can go with more albums that took them from being a star to a superstar and icon status. For instance, U2 went to superstar status with the Joshua Tree and then went next level with Achtung Baby. Michael Jackson, of course, went from star with Off the Wall to mega superstar with Thriller, literally overnight. Watch or listen to last week's episode where I talked about Michael Jackson doing the moonwalk on the Motown 25 TV special with 47 million people watching. But have you ever wondered how Bruce Springsteen became Bruce? Well, it all came about in the 1980s, and it had some unintended help from, of all things, politics. The year was 1982. After Bruce had put out the popular album, The River, he put out what some would have considered to have been his best songwriting with the album Nebraska. The album, which was more acoustic than anything, did not do all that well on the pop charts. By this point, Bruce had already made the leap to star status. After years of being a critical darling, he finally broke through with the general public with the album Born to Run. The album The River kept things flowing, while Nebraska ended up being that wrong turn that just kept going, at least in the public arena. The critics loved it, though. Bruce started writing songs for his next album by freshening up some songs that he had started writing during Nebraska. This time around, he decided to go more pop. Well, okay, at least his version of pop. He incorporated more synthesizers and whatnot, but he did not lose his overall rock feel except for maybe one song, which we will get to. He also didn't lose what got Bruce to where he was, his lyrics about the plight of the American dream and the American worker. The album was recorded over the first 4 months of 1982 and then finished in June and October of 1983. There were 80 songs that were written during that time period, with some of the songs landing on Nebraska and the vast majority of the songs going into the vault to see the light of day on some anniversary package, I'm sure, at some point. Most of the 12 songs were recorded at the Power Station, while a few others were recorded at the Hit Factory, both studios in New York City. John Landau, who was also Bruce's manager, did co-production duties along with Chuck Plotkin, Bruce, and little Stevie himself, Stephen Van Zandt. Toby Scott was the engineer. Bill Sheneman engineered No Surrender. Mastering was done by Bob Ludwig. Andrea Klein did the album art design. Famed celebrity photographer Annie Leibovitz did the famous album cover shot. More on that particular album cover in a minute. Some songs, like No Surrender, Bruce considered actually leaving off the album what was talked into keeping them. The song Dancing in the Dark was about as pop as you could get from Bruce, and that was the first song released from the album. It was very danceable, which was not the Springsteen way. Legend has it that the album was done during an overnight session in 1983, but John Landau didn't think that there was a single on the particular album. Springsteen got angry, went home, cooled off, sat down, and then wrote Dancing in the Dark in one night. John was wrong, though. It turns out there were actually 7 singles on that album. Anyway, the music video for Dancing in the Dark featured an onstage dance at the end with a young woman who would go on to make a show about 6 friends who could afford multi-million-dollar apartments by doing menial labor jobs, and in a city of 8 million people with over 100 different nationalities, only knew 2 black women and no other minorities to speak of. Seriously, in New York City. But I digress. This isn't about Courtney Cox, and it isn't about the TV show Friends. This is about Bruce. Born in the USA was finally released on June 4th, 1984. It was the first album whose CD was made in America, as up to that point CDs had been made in Japan. Also, CDs didn't get popular until the early 1990s, so Springsteen was, of course, way ahead of his time. Due to Dancing in the Dark, the album proved very popular, debuting at number 9 in America and hitting number 1 only 3 weeks later. While the album started hot, and with Springsteen laying the groundwork for superstardom for almost a decade at that point, Bruce still wasn't at icon level quite yet. What happened were a few things. For starters, Bruce went and toured Europe. And it was there that he noticed that he was beginning to sell out huge stadiums in places where his music had never been all that popular before. He also at one time had all 7 of his albums to date on the British albums chart at the same time, a feat not even the Beatles managed to pull off in their home country at that point. The album did have some controversy with it, which is what led to it becoming even bigger in some ways. First was the meaning behind the title track, Born in the USA. The song is actually about the plight of the Vietnam veterans, with the phrase Born in the USA really meaning, why am I being treated in this manner? I was born in the USA. The meaning was completely lost on people, though, who only heard the chorus Born in the USA and thought it was a patriotic song. It's not in the rah-rah fireworks sort of way. But to this day, it still gets played at every 4th of July fireworks show, so there you go. Apparently, the song, and for that matter the album, was also lost on President Ronald Reagan, who during a campaign rally tried to incorporate Springsteen into one of his speeches, talking about the American values that he shared with Bruce in the song. Bruce was having none of it, smacking down Reagan at his next concert, saying that apparently Reagan had not really listened to his albums, especially Nebraska, but then again, no one listened to Nebraska at that time, which talked about the plight of the working man. Reagan, for the record, won by a landslide that year in the presidential campaign against Walter Mondale, taking 49 out of 50 states. So, The political controversy, of course, continues to this day with the recent airing of grievances between Bruce and a certain politician who just got a nice shiny new jet from the Hamas funding country called Qatar. He who shall not be named. Another bit of controversy concerned that album cover. The now famous photo of Bruce standing in blue jeans in front of the American flag with his back to the camera was seen by some to make it look like Bruce was urinating on the flag. It was unintentional. Besides, Bruce had buffed up in between Nebraska and the new album, and he wanted to show off a little, Being buff also helped him to become an icon. I don't think he was hitting dad bod status at that point, but let's just say he was kind of getting up there. So, midlife crisis and all. So, between his European tour and all the political posturing at home over him, Bruce suddenly found himself an international superstar. Born in the USA ended up giving him 7 top 10 singles, becoming one of the biggest selling albums of all time, and his high-octane marathon church revival-style concerts established Bruce as the boss, and that, my friends, is how Bruce became Bruce! Bruce Springsteen's iconic album, Born in the USA, released on June 4th, 1984. Before we continue, we'd like to tell you about the Music History Today podcast, where we go over the events that happened on that particular day in music history. The Music History Today podcast drops every single day, including weekends, on this podcast network. Now, back to the Music History In-Depth podcast. The next 2 stories both happened on June 1st and both concern the same band. First, a little backstory. In 1966, the Beatles decided that they were done touring. They couldn't deal with being on stage anymore. The screaming from their fans had gotten so loud they couldn't even hear themselves play. As John Lennon said, they could, quote, send out 4 waxworks and that would satisfy the crowds. Beatles concerts have nothing to do with music anymore. They're just bloody tribal rites, end quote. Finally, they had enough. No more touring. Time to take a few months off for a break to work on individual projects. During that break, by the way, John Lennon met Yoko Ono. Then concentrate on being in the studio and creating new music. But what new music? And in which direction did they want to go? The band had already started to take the turn from being a glorified boy band when they put out their 1965 album Rubber Soul and then their 1966 album Revolver. Now, Paul McCartney wanted to take it to a whole other level. Late in 1966, he had an idea about doing a song about a band. This idea then went from just a song about a band to an entire album. Also, knowing that they never had to perform the songs live in concert ever again, it gave them complete freedom to produce the songs any way they wanted to. Imagine how much different Revolver or Rubber Soul would have sounded if they had stopped touring earlier. This album experimented with vaudeville, classical music, psychedelia, along with pop music. It also experimented with overdubbing, pitch control, automatic double tracking, and other recording tricks that today we all kind of take for granted. They even took recording tape, spliced it, and flipped it upside down and in the wrong direction just to get new sounds out of it. What came out of all of that experimenting was pure genius. Remember, this was all done without the benefit of FL Studio or any of the other computer programs for that matter. None of that had even been invented yet. The album was also the first one to have all of the song lyrics included in every single copy, a practice I really miss these days in the era of digital. On May 26, 1969, the album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, was released in England, and on June 1st, 1967 in America. The album unofficially kicked off the Summer of Love and turned the Beatles into counterculture symbols. The album is considered to be one of the greatest albums of all time, either number 1 or number 2, depending on which version of the Rolling Stone magazine Greatest Albums of All Time list you're looking at, both in terms of songwriting and technological use. And it has certified sales of over 11 million copies in America alone and over 32 million copies sold worldwide. And you would think that an album of this caliber would have sold a lot more copies, truthfully. Legend has it that when Paul McCartney played an advance recording to Bob Dylan, Dylan responded, quote, "Oh, I get it," end quote. What Dylan meant was that the Beatles had gone from being the boy band to growing up. Legend also has it that Jimi Hendrix got a hold of the album, learned the song Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band in a few days, and played the song at the Seville Theatre in London, England on June 4th, with Beatles members George Harrison and Paul McCartney in the audience, no less. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band had the now classic songs, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, With a Little Help from My Friends, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, Getting Better, Fixing a Hole, She's Leaving Home, Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite, Within You, Without You, When I'm 64, Lovely Rita Meter Maid, Good Morning, and one of my all-time favorite Beatles songs, A Day in the Life. In 1968, it won 4 Grammy Awards, including Album of the Year, and it is no wonder that the Library of Congress in America put it into the National Recording Registry. The Beatles' iconic album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, released in America on June 1st, 1967. 2 years later, another Beatle made a classic while in bed. John Lennon and Yoko Ono were married on March 20th, 1969. Since they knew that the press were going to hound them during the honeymoon, they decided to use it as a way to promote peace, as the Vietnam War was in full swing at the time, as were the protests against the Vietnam War. They held what they called bed-in performance art protests. The first ones were held in Amsterdam. They had the press come to their hotel room where they would talk about the Vietnam War, among other things, and they did other publicity stunts, such as sending acorns in the name of peace to world leaders. After the Amsterdam protests, they decided to do another bed-in. They first tried New York and the Bahamas, but those plans fell through. New York due to John not being allowed in the country at the time due to a conviction of sorts that he had in England, and the Bahamas because, well, it was too hot. They decided instead to go to Montreal, Canada, so off they went. John wrote a song during the bed-in after giving a reporter an offhanded comment to a question. And then, on June 1st, 1969, he and Yoko invited celebrities such as Tommy Smothers of the Smothers Brothers, Petula Clark, Dr. Timothy Leary, Allen Ginsberg, and Dick Gregory over. Tommy Smothers helped to play guitar on the song. Everyone else clapped and played tambourines. Producer Andre Perry, who was called to record the song almost at the last minute by the A&R team at Capitol Records Canada, set up 4 microphones and recorded it, while John turned the offhanded comment, "Give Peace a Chance," into an anti-war anthem in a hotel bedroom in Montreal on June 1st, 1969. Our last 2 stories concern the same exact band. One concerns them directly, and one concerns their influence. First, how did an anti-establishment group help make a now popular billionaire become rich? By turning bad press into big money while creating a classic at the same time. In 1977, this group wanted to commemorate the British monarch's silver jubilee with a song, a not-so-flattering song. This song was then promptly banned by the BBC on May 31st of that year. Most record stores wouldn't sell the record after that. The song upset so many people that members of the press and Parliament called for the group to be tried for treason of all things. Usually that would be the kiss of death for a song, especially when Queen Elizabeth II doesn't like you, and a group would pretty much die on the vine at that point. Except that this was not just any song, and it certainly wasn't just any group. This song was the now classic God Save the Queen, and this group was the legendary Sex Pistols. The Sex Pistols thrived on pissing off the establishment, so to them becoming public enemy number 1 only helped their cause. It also helped that their record label head was a bit of a showman. He was also a master at marketing. Their record label head was a guy who loved to take a lot of risks. Everything from flying hot air balloons across the Pacific Ocean to taking a boat across solo on the Atlantic Ocean. The dude was a bit of an adventurer. He kind of had that streak in him. He took those risks into business as well, which is what made signing the Sex Pistols seem like a great move to him, as the Pistols had been bounced out of EMI Records for supposed bad behavior, I guess. One stunt that he pulled was to charter a boat, put huge speakers on it, and blast the song to maximum while the boat went down the Thames River in London. The cops were none too pleased and gave chase, which made for priceless marketing footage for the band, of course. In spite of the bans and in spite of the boycotts, or maybe because of them, the song quickly became a hit. Stores that did sell the song sometimes sold over 150,000 copies a day. The song never made the number 1 spot on the singles chart despite its popularity. The best it could do, though, was number 2, which, that's not too bad. However, the song made money for the band, and especially the head of the record label, Virgin Records head and master of marketing extraordinaire, Sir Richard Branson. And they all have the BBC to partially thank for their good fortune for banning the punk anthem God Save the Queen on May 31st, 1977. Now to the Sex Pistols' influence. Can you imagine being a band who managed to influence 3 musical styles, punk music, post-punk, and new wave, all during one concert, all in one night? On June 4th, 1976, the Sex Pistols managed to do just that. They were just beginning to make a name for themselves, but were not quite big yet. Although their brand was essentially in place, they were still a few months away from becoming what we all know them as today. In 1976, the band was so small that you could go see them in really small clubs, go up to them and get to talk to them, which is what two kids from Manchester, England did one night. Howard Devoto and Pete Shelley went down to London from Manchester to hear them play and were blown away. So much so that they went up to the band and convinced them to play in Manchester a few months later. The band agreed. News of the concert spread by word of mouth, and when the Sex Pistols played Lesser Free Trade Hall in Manchester, England, on June 4th, 1976, they played to an overwhelmingly huge crowd of, check my notes here, less than 50 people. 50. That's it. Not the thousands who swore that they were there. In a place that holds hundreds of people, less than 50 showed up to hear the Sex Pistols play. Yet, much like millions of Americans who claim that they were at Woodstock when there were only 500,000 people there, virtually every British guy over the age of 50 swears that they were in Manchester that night. Something happened that night, though. Something absolutely magical. The Sex Pistols played with such energy and passion, it struck a chord with at least 1/5 of the entire audience. So much so that those people went and not only started their own bands, they then changed music as we know it today. Let's start off with those two guys who brought them to play in Manchester to begin with, Howard Devoto and Pete Shelley. Those guys formed the band The Buzzcocks, which had formed officially in February of that year, but had a few members fall out of the band by the time of this show. Once those guys heard the Sex Pistols play, they took themselves a whole lot more seriously as a band after that performance. Ian Curtis, Bernard Sumner, and Pete Hook, who were in the audience that night, well, those guys ended up forming Joy Division. And then when Ian tragically passed away, the others went on as New Order. Mark E. Smith started an influential group called The Fall. Mick Hucknall ended up in a band called Frantic Elevators before fronting the band that made him really famous, Simply Red. Pat Morley went on to become a famous writer of the music scene of that era. Tony Wilson started the famous record label Factory Records and helped to propel the music of Manchester for almost 2 decades as the epicenter of punk, post-punk, and new wave music. And then there's a guy by the name of Stephen Patrick Morrissey, who went on to front the band The Smiths and also had a really good solo career as well. As for the Sex Pistols, after that 50-person turnout, they went back to London and played 2 concerts in July. Their opening acts for those concerts were a couple of new bands that no one had heard of quite yet, The Clash and The Damned, 2 bands that would also go on to change history in their own right. Oh, also, the Sex Pistols did go back to Manchester and played at Lesser Free Trade Hall again only 2 months after their first performance there. This time around, hundreds showed up. Punk music had officially taken hold, and the Sex Pistols were on their way. Their opening act for that concert, by the way, Pete and Howard's new band, The Buzzcocks. Don't you love how things just come full circle? One night, one concert, changed lives, changed music, changed the world forever. The Sex Pistols gig at Manchester Lesser Free Trade Hall, dubbed the gig that changed the world, as it's commonly known now, happened on June 4th, 1976. And that is it for this oversized edition of the Music History In-Depth podcast for May 29th through June 4th. Thank you very, very much for listening. and putting up with my just getting over the flu voice on either Spotify or YouTube. You can watch it, or iTunes, etc., wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you very, very much.